Imagine someone just hands you this heavy wooden box. You open it up, and you're fully expecting to find this sprawling history book, right? Like maybe a diary of a mad king or some massive encyclopedia detailing the rise and fall of ancient empires.
Right, some kind of dense text.
Exactly. But you look inside, and there is not a single sentence of narrative text in there. I mean, nothing. Instead, you pull out a stack of these massive, incredibly detailed, full-color maps.
Which is quite the curveball.
It totally is.
Yeah.
And your only job is to somehow reconstruct the politics, the terrors, the economies, and, the daily lives of an entire complex world using literally nothing but the topography.
Yeah.
Just the drawn borders and the painted terrain laid out right in front of you.
Yeah.
You're essentially trying to understand the soul of a civilization by just staring at the wrinkles and calluses on the physical earth.
It really is the ultimate exercise in observation and deduction because, we have this very modern tendency to think of maps as purely objective documents.
Well, for sure, like Google Maps.
Exactly. We pull up a map on our phone and it's just this neutral tool to get us from the coffee shop to the highway. But historical cartography is, it's never neutral. Never.
Right.
A drawn map is a profoundly subjective, silent storyteller. It tells you where the water is, which, tells you where the crop yields are highest.
Which dictates where the people actually live.
Exactly, where the population centers form. But even more importantly, a drawn map reveals the psychology of the person holding the pen.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part.
It really is. It shows you what they value, what they consider to be the center of the universe, and crucially, what they are absolutely terrified of.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us, we are so thrilled you're here. Today, we are opening that exact wooden box. We're diving into a collection of 12 extraordinary maps covering this vast area that's simply known as the known world.
And it is vast.
Oh, it's massive.
Yeah.
This collection spans from a frozen, hostile wasteland in the extreme north, which is ominously labeled Beyond the Wall.
Great name, by the way.
Right? So creepy. And it goes all the way across these massive oceans to a deeply mysterious region known only as the East. And we have a very specific mission today for this deep dive.
We do. We are essentially engaging in pure geographical profiling.
I love that term.
It's what we're doing. We're going to read these 12 maps together. We're going to dissect the topography, the urban planning of the capital cities, the implied trade routes, and these extreme biomes.
Right.
Our goal is to deduce the physical realities and the inevitable cultural divides of this world, relying purely on the visual evidence provided by the cartographer's ink.
Which means we need to set a firm ground rule, both for you, the listener, and for ourselves.
Yeah, it's very important.
We are strictly acting as cartographers today. We are not bringing in outside lore. We aren't opening character biographies. We're not looking up royal family trees. None of that.
No cheating.
Right. No cheating. We are letting the geography speak entirely for itself. We're looking at the parchment, the mountain ranges, the rivers, the coastlines. And that's it.
And honestly, stripping away the narrative history is incredibly liberating.
How so?
Well, when you remove the kings, the queens, and all the battles from the equation, you're left with the raw, uncompromising reality of the Earth itself. The truth is, geography dictates history, not the other way around.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. A mountain range creates a linguistic divide. A deep river basin builds an agricultural empire. An ocean acts as a natural moat.
It sets the rules of the game.
Exactly. We are looking at the board before the chess pieces have even been placed.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because if we are looking at the board, we can't really start by analyzing a single square. We have to look at the edges of the table first.
The macro view.
Right. When you unroll the macro map, the one literally titled The Known World, the very first thing that dominates your vision isn't the land at all. It's the water.
It's everywhere.
The continents are framed by these massive, unforgiving oceans that seem to serve as this absolute limit to human ambition.
Yeah, the oceans on this map function as the walls of reality. If you look at the far western edge, we have a body of water called the Sunset Sea.
Right.
And if you trace your finger to the westernmost border of the parchment, there is absolutely no landmass visible beyond it. None. It is a vast, unbroken expanse of deep blue.
Just water.
Just water. And the naming convention alone is telling. Sunset Sea implies finality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's the place where the sun goes down. And for the civilization that drew this map, it clearly represents the literal edge of existence.
You look at that unbroken blue and you just realize no one is sailing west Or, if some ambitious explorer did decide to sail west, they certainly never came back to update the Cartographers Guild.
Exactly. It's an absolute geographic barrier.
And then, framing the top of the world, we have the Shivering Sea.
Just reading the name makes you feel cold.
Right. You can feel the ambient temperature drop just looking at it. It hugs these icy northern land masses. And then down south, acting as a sort of counterweight, is the Summer Sea, which is washing against what looks like warmer tropical archipelagos.
And these oceanic borders, they define the known world by explicitly highlighting where the unknown begins.
Right.
Now, floating within this massive aquatic frame, we have 3 distinct landmasses. And their basic geometric shapes immediately suggest entirely different logistical destinies for the people living on them.
The shapes are completely wild when you actually compare them side by side.
They really are.
On the western side of the map, you have Westeros. It is this long, vertically oriented, fairly narrow continent. Visually, to me at least, it reminds me of a massively stretched out South America, or maybe like an oversized Great Britain.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
And it spans from a frozen Arctic north all the way down to a scorched, arid south.
And that vertical orientation is probably the single most important geographical fact of Westeros.
Why is that?
Well, if we apply real-world geographical theories here, like Jared Diamond's axis theory from guns, germs, and steel.
Oh, right.
Yeah, a vertical continent creates massive developmental hurdles. Because Westeros stretches so far from north to south, it crosses multiple extreme climatic zones.
Okay.
A crop that thrives in the temperate middle just cannot grow in the frozen north or the desert south, and livestock can't easily be transplanted either.
Wait, so if the agriculture can't spread, then the culture can't spread either.
Exactly.
You end up with highly segmented, distinct populations because the daily reality of, surviving in the snow requires a completely different societal structure than surviving in a literal desert.
Exactly that. A vertical continent naturally fractures its population. It divides them. But then if you look across this relatively narrow strip of water to the east, you see a continent that operates on the exact opposite geometric principle. Essos.
Essos is a horizontal beast. I mean, it is a sprawling, incredibly wide landmass that just seems to drag on forever toward the eastern edge of the map.
It just keeps going.
It does. If Westeros is an exercise in surviving different climates, Essos looks like an exercise in pure endurance. It resembles the massive Eurasian steppe.
And because it is horizontally oriented, right, sharing roughly the same latitude across massive distances, the climate remains relatively stable as you move east to west.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so this allows for vast, sweeping movements of people, animals, and technology. You don't have to change your entire way of life or invent new agricultural techniques to move 500 miles east in Essos.
Because the grass is basically the same grass.
Exactly. It's an environment that encourages mobility and rapid expansion, which is entirely unlike the isolated, static pockets of Westeros.
And then almost like falling off the bottom right corner of the parchment, we had these southern fragments, Sothorios and Olthos.
Right, the Forgotten Continent.
They barely even register as continents. They're just these dark, heavily forested coastlines that very quickly trail off into vagueness.
Which brings us to the most crucial meta-analysis of this map, the subjectivity of the cartographer.
Yes, the bias.
Exactly. If we check the map's legend, we see distinct markers for cities, towns, ruined cities, castles, and ruined castles. Now, when you scan Westeros, or the western coast of Essos, these markers are everywhere.
Yeah, the map is super densely populated there.
It's meticulously detailed. You see tiny tributaries, winding coastal roads, small bays.
But the moment your eyes drift further east across Essos or south down into Sothorios, all of those markers just vanish.
They're completely gone.
The ink gets blurry, the coastlines lose their sharp definition, the interior details are entirely replaced by generic tree icons or just empty space.
Right. And the thing is, the eastern and southern parts of the world aren't actually empty. The cartographer just has absolutely no idea what is there.
Yeah.
This map is a deeply subjective document. The way the edges fade into obscurity heavily implies that the person holding the pen lives in the west, likely in Westeros or, the westernmost cities of FR.
They're drawing their own neighborhood, basically.
Yes. To them, their home is the center of the universe, meticulously mapped and understood. The Far East and the Deep South are just terrifying rumors.
It's the medieval equivalent of drawing a sea monster in the corner and writing, "Here be dragons."
Precisely.
The further you travel from the mapmaker's desk, the less reliable the geography becomes.
We are seeing this world through a very specific, Western-centric lens. The cartographer values the West, understands the West, and maps the West with absolute confidence.
So if vertical geography breeds division, what happens when we actually zoom in on that vertical continent? Because when you pull out the specific regional maps of Westeros, the geography seems actively hostile to the very idea of unity.
Hostile is a great word for it.
It really is. It's a continent composed almost entirely of brooder choke points and extreme biomes.
Well, the verticality guarantees extreme temperature gradients, like we talked about. At the very top of the Westeros map, the terrain is dominated by stark white. It is frozen, hostile, Arctic tundra.
And tracing your finger southward, that white bleeds into these deep, dark green pine forests. Then it softens into lighter, rolling green plains and riverlands in the center.
Right.
And by the time you reach the very bottom, a region labeled Dorne, the color palette, flips completely. It's painted in arid, scorched orange and red tones. It's a harsh desert.
So the people living in the white wastes at the top have absolutely nothing in common with the people living in the red deserts at the bottom.
Nothing at all.
Their economies, their clothing, their architecture, their water management, everything is fundamentally different. But the climate gradient isn't even the most aggressive dividing line on this map.
Oh, not even close. Look right near the top of Westeros, bisecting the frozen north from the slate. Less frozen north. There is a massive, perfectly straight line cutting entirely across the landmass, from the Western Ocean to the Eastern Sea.
It's so striking.
It really is. It's simply labeled the Wall. And I'm looking at this and thinking, mountain ranges curve, they follow tectonic plates, rivers snake through valleys. A perfectly straight line is a defiance of nature.
It's purely artificial.
Exactly. This is an artificial structure. And I just have to ask, looking purely at this map, who builds a coast-to-coast wall in a medieval setting? The logistics of just feeding the stonemasons would bankrupt a continent. What on earth are they so afraid of?
It's a great question because you don't undertake an engineering project of that unimaginable scale unless the threat is existential.
Right.
Think about the real-world equivalents, like Hadrian's Wall or the Great Wall of China.
Sure.
Those were built to keep out human raiders. But this wall is located in a frozen wasteland. The caloric cost, the forestry required for scaffolding, the quarrying of stone or ice, it implies a centralized, massive mobilization of resources driven by absolute terror.
Wow.
It is the ultimate geographic statement of us versus them. It artificially amputates the northernmost part of the continent.
It's as if an entire civilization just drew a line on the earth and said, everything north of here is no longer our problem, and whatever lives up there cannot be allowed down here.
Exactly. But even if we move south, below the wall, nature does plenty of amputating on its own. The map of Westeros is naturally segmented into distinct, isolated regions by highly difficult geography.
Yeah, we have to talk about the geographic nightmare right in the middle of the continent.
The neck.
Yes, the top half of Westeros is huge and sprawling, but right in the center, the land pinches violently inward from both oceans. It creates this incredibly narrow strip of land connecting the vast north to the southern kingdoms.
And notice the coloring and texture the cartographer used for the neck.
It's really gross looking.
It is. It isn't the solid green of a plain or the brown of a mountain. It is mottled. Dark, swampy, dotted with little blue pools and erratic, sickly green shading. It is a massive, continent-spanning bog.
Which is terrifying from a military perspective. If you are a Southern general and you want to march your army north, you have a massive
A
problem.
huge problem.
You can't sail around it easily because of the treacherous coastline, so you have to march straight through the neck. And mechanically, swamps defeat armies.
They absolutely do.
Heavy cavalry, useless, the horses just sink. Siege engines, bogged down in the mud. Supply wagons, stuck. Disease vectors from the stagnant water would decimate your infantry before they even saw an enemy. It is the ultimate bottleneck.
You're describing the exact mechanics of why geography is destiny. The neck acts as a natural fortress. A small local force that knows the safe paths through the bog could hold off a massive southern army indefinitely.
Right, because the southern army can't deploy their numbers.
Exactly. It protects the north from southern invasion better than any stone wall ever could. And as we scan the rest of the continent, we see similar natural borders everywhere.
Yeah, mountains and rivers.
Massive mountain ranges curve through the land, carving out isolated, fertile valleys. Deep, wide rivers cut across the plains.
You don't even need a history book to draw the political borders here. A mountain range hugging the western coast creates a perfect, naturally defended western kingdom. A massive river system creates a natural boundary for a central domain.
The geography is literally doing the work of drawing political boundaries before a single king even puts a crown on his head.
That's such a cool way to think about it.
Geography creates the lock, politics just turns the key. If your civilization develops behind a massive mountain range, your economy, your defense strategy, and your cultural identity will form in complete isolation from the people on the other side of those peaks.
So Westeros is a continent explicitly designed by nature to be fractured.
Totally.
Well, since Westeros is highly divided, and we've established that this massive artificial wall in the north is driven by existential terror, I mean, the map is practically begging us to ask what it's keeping out.
We have to look.
We do. Let's look at the map specifically titled Beyond the Wall.
Pulling out the Beyond the Wall map is a drastic, unsettling tonal shift.
It really is.
We just left the densely detailed maps of southern Westeros, which, are cluttered with roads, castles, and towns. Here, human civilization just vanishes. The imposing, hostile topography takes center stage.
And the environment looks actively aggressive. You have this massive, sprawling, dark green area labeled the Haunted Forest.
Haunted Forest. Again, the names are so evocative.
They really are. And the cartographer drew the trees so tightly together, it looks less like a woodland and more like a solid, impenetrable wall of wood.
Yeah, it's very dense.
And to the west of the forest, you had these jagged, terrifying mountains labeled the Frost Fangs. Just the name Frost Fangs tells you how the mapmaker feels about them. Nature here isn't just cold, it has teeth.
And we must return to our cartographic legend, because what is missing is just as important as what is present.
Right, the markers.
Aside from a few scattered tiny markers right up against the wall or hugging the coast, the interior of this massive landmass has absolutely no civilization markers, no cities, no towns, no castles. It is pure, unbroken wilderness.
There are no roads or trade routes, just haunted forests and freezing mountains. But then as your eyes track to the very top edge of this map, something deeply unsettling happens.
The fate.
Yeah. The area is labeled the Lands of Always Winter. And the cartographer literally just gives up. The map loses its color. The detailed topography vanishes. The parchment just fades out into a stark, terrifying, blank white expanse.
The fade to white is a brilliant piece of cartographic communication.
It is.
It represents the absolute biological limit of human endurance. It visually communicates that whoever ventures that far north simply does not survive to report back on the topography. The cold itself becomes an impenetrable barrier, far stronger than the artificial stone wall to the south.
But wait, I'm looking at this and thinking about the logistics of map making, right?
Okay.
If there are no cities, no towns, no safe harbors, and the environment is actively trying to freeze you solid, who is actually surveying this land?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. Who is out there measuring the specific curvature of the Frost Fangs with a compass? This entire map feels less like a reliable mathematical survey and much more like a collection of terrified campfire rumors drawn by people who refuse to step 1 foot further north.
That is an incredibly astute observation. A map of an unpopulated, hyper-hostile wasteland is almost certainly a composite of myths, survival tales from desperate scouts, and pure, unadulterated guesswork.
They're just making it up.
Largely, yes. The cartographer is filling in the terrifying blanks with dense trees and jagged peaks because that is what the collective imagination of the South projects onto the unknown North. It is a map of psychological fear as much as it is a map of physical land.
Okay, so if vertical Westeros is defined by isolation and freezing borders, what happens when a landmass is stretched horizontally?
We go to Essos.
Let's cross the narrow sea over to Essos, because Essos is defined by endless horizontal sprawl and what appears to be a massive geographical trauma.
When we open the central Essos and the Dothraki sea maps, the sheer, unbroken scale of the comment really hits you.
It's huge.
But I want to focus on the center. There's this massive central expanse colored entirely in yellowish green.
It's clearly labeled the Dothraki Sea. But this is where the map starts playing tricks on you, because there is no blue water. It's not an ocean.
No, despite the word sea, the coloring and the lack of coastal indicators tell us this is a massive terrestrial plain. It is a sweeping continental steppe. And much like the deep north of Westeros, notice the glaring absence of civilization markers in this vast interior.
Yeah, if you look at the western coastlines of Essos, they are absolutely peppered with cities, towns, and roads. But the moment you move inland into this Dothraki Sea, the markers vanish. It is completely empty. It's an ocean of grass.
We need to understand the mechanics of an ocean of grass. Why are there no cities here?
Well, lack of water.
Precisely. A cartographer coloring an area yellow-green across thousands of miles indicates a lack of deep-rooted forests and a lack of significant reliable river systems. This is likely a massive rain shadow.
Oh, interesting.
Without permanent, large-scale water sources, you cannot have irrigation. Without irrigation, you cannot have static agriculture. And without agriculture, you simply cannot sustain a permanent city.
Which means anyone living in that vast green center cannot stay in one place. They have to move constantly to survive, following the seasonal grasses to feed their animals.
Right.
They are nomadic. They ride across the sea of grass, much like sailors navigate the actual ocean.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And a nomadic culture occupying the center of a continent acts as a massive barrier to land-based trade. You cannot build a paved highway across a steppe controlled by highly mobile, aggressive nomads.
They just raid the caravans.
Exactly. It forces all the static agricultural civilizations to the fringes.
That perfectly explains the weird urban distribution on the map. Let's look at the Free Cities map, which details the western edge of Essos facing Westeros.
Okay.
All the dense civilizations, the major cities, the towns, the intricate road networks, it all clings desperately to the coastline.
The cities are quite literally turning their backs on the harsh interior of their own continent.
Wow, yeah.
By building their infrastructure directly on the coast, they are relying on the narrow sea for trade, for food, and for communication. The ocean is their safe highway, while the solid land behind them is a hostile, untamable frontier.
It's a complete reversal of how a land-based kingdom views the world. For these free cities, the water is predictable and profitable, and the vast landmass behind them is the terrifying unknown.
But as we trace the coastlines of Essos further south, we encounter something far more dramatic than an empty grassland.
Yeah, we really do.
If you look at the southern peninsula, visible on both the central Essos and Slaver's Bay maps, you see geography that literally defies natural geology.
I am staring at the Valerian Peninsula, and honestly, it is visually shocking.
It jumps right off the page.
It does. If you look at any other coastline on these 12 maps, it has smooth curves, natural bays, logical river deltas. But you look at Valyria, and it looks shattered.
Shattered is the perfect word.
It looks like a piece of glass that someone smashed with a hammer. It is broken into all these jagged, fractured islands, separated by chaotic, aggressive-looking streets of
You
water.
get color palette changes entirely, too.
Yeah, it's not the normal blues and greens. It is shaded with these dark, unnatural reds and blacks. It looks like dried blood or like cooled magma.
We have to ask what happened here, because from a purely geological standpoint, this isn't normal coastal erosion.
Right.
Tides and wind do not fracture a landmass into sharp, jagged splinters. The visual representation here heavily implies a massive, localized cataclysm.
It looks like an explosion. It looks like a caldera collapse or a catastrophic volcanic event literally blew an entire peninsula to pieces.
And if we consult the map legend, the tragedy of this region comes into sharp focus. The density of markers for ruined cities in this specific shattered area is astronomical.
So sad to look at.
There are ruined cities on almost every jagged fragment of rock.
The implication is just staggering. You have this central southern peninsula. It clearly used to be heavily populated. It was likely a massive hub for maritime trade given its central location. And then, in a geological instant, it was wiped off the map.
The cartographer isn't just drawing land here. They are drawing a planetary scar.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it.
The red and black ink serves as a visual warning. It is a record of a historical trauma akin to, the Bronze Age collapse or the eruption of Thera in our world that literally broke the world. The sheer volume of ruined cities tells a silent story of a fallen empire. Millions of people died, and whatever environmental devastation occurred, no one has returned to rebuild.
It leaves a massive economic and power vacuum right in the middle of the Southern Sea. It is chilling to look at.
It really is.
So we've looked at the macro boundaries, the extreme biomes, and the shattered empires, but maps also zoom in, right? They tell us how people live on a daily basis.
The micro view.
Exactly. Let's look at the urban planning of this world by comparing the two highly detailed city maps provided in this collection, King's Landing and Braavos.
Comparing these two cities is a masterclass in how geography shapes defense strategy and societal philosophy. Let's start with the map of King's Landing. When you look at this city, what is the single most defining feature?
The wall. Absolutely the wall.
Yeah.
There's a massive, thick, unbroken defensive wall wrapping entirely around the city limits. It defines the entire shape of the settlement.
And the presence of a massive, encompassing wall tells you everything you need to know about a city's geopolitical anxiety.
They're scared.
Very. King's Landing was built with land-based sieges in mind. It fully expects a massive army to march up to its gates one day.
The city sits right on the mouth of a large river, the Blackwater Rush, where it meets a bay. So it has naval access, but the city itself is heavily rooted on the land. And the internal geography inside those walls is fascinating.
What stands out to you?
The skyline is dominated by 3 distinct, highly elevated hills.
Elevation in an ancient or medieval city is power.
Right.
The higher you are, the cleaner the air, the further away you are from the sewage in the streets, and crucially, the easier you are to defend if the outer walls are breached.
Well, and on one of those hills, positioned directly overlooking the water, sits a massive, sprawling fortress. It dwarfs every other structure in the city. The other 2 hills hold large domed structures or ruined cavernous buildings.
But look at the space between the hills.
Oh my gosh, yes. Below those hills, filling every single inch of available space inside the defensive wall, the street layout is absolute chaos. It is a dense, organic, unorganized sprawl. Tiny, winding alleys tangled together without any grid or logical flow.
This organic, chaotic sprawl suggests a city that grew far too fast, completely outgrowing its original urban planning. As the population swelled, people just built houses wherever they could find a square foot of dirt right up against each other.
Wow.
They trapped themselves inside their own defensive perimeter.
It looks deeply claustrophobic. If a siege happens, that wall keeps the enemy out, but it also traps the entire population inside. From a sanitation and disease perspective, it looks like a nightmare. It reminds me of the chaotic sprawl of medieval Paris or London.
Now, contrast that claustrophobia with the map of Braavos. This is where the engineering becomes extraordinary.
Now, I love the Braavos map. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Right. Unroll the Braavos map. What is the first thing you notice?
The complete lack of a wall. There isn't a single stone wall surrounding the city. Instead, Braavos is built entirely on a sprawling network of dozens of islands within a massive enclosed lagoon. The water is the wall.
It is an engineered marvel that uses geography as an impenetrable shield. The map shows a massive mountainous landmass wrapping around the outer edge of the lagoon, acting as a natural breakwater against the harsh ocean.
Yeah.
And there is only one narrow, navigable maritime entrance to get inside.
And guarding that single entrance, the map shows a giant statue straddling the channel of the Titan.
It's very dramatic.
It looks like it serves as a lighthouse, an advanced watchtower, and honestly a terrifying psychological warning to incoming ships.
The Titan guards the door, but the interior of the city is a masterpiece of mathematical urban engineering. If King's Landing is organic chaos, Braavos is pristine precision.
Yeah, look at the canals.
Look at the highly organized canal system. The water replaces the cobblestone streets. There are intricate, perfectly straight bridges connecting the islands. The districts are cleanly segmented.
It looks like a hyper-organized fantasy and press. It is clean, efficient, and entirely dependent on the sea. The geography dictates the economy completely. If you live in Braavos and you don't have a boat, you simply aren't participating in society.
Which tells us exactly where their power lies. A city built on islands, protected by a lagoon with no land walls, is a city that relies completely on maritime trade and naval supremacy. They do not fear a traditional army marching to their gates because infantry and heavy cavalry cannot march on water. They have taken a harsh coastal geography and weaponized it to their absolute advantage, creating an impregnable sanctuary.
Think about your own daily commute for a second. If you lived in King's Landing, you are navigating cramped, disease-prone, winding alleys, constantly aware of the massive stone wall boxing you in.
Right.
If you live in Braavos, you are navigating open canals, relying on the tides, protected only by the water and a giant statue. Based purely on looking at these 2 maps, it is a fascinating choice between claustrophobic security and engineered maritime openness.
For our final piece of geographical analysis, we need to zoom back out.
Okay, macro again.
We've looked at the heavily mapped west, the vast center, and the extreme cities. But we have to look at the very edges of the map again, and specifically, we need to look at how all these isolated, hostile places connect. Let's look at the mysterious east and the final map in the collection.
If we pull up the east map, we mentioned earlier how the map gets blurrier the further east you go.
Right.
But what the cartographer does draw is wild. You have this massive, lush, green area labeled Yt, which looks like a sprawling, incredibly wealthy empire. But bordering it You have this intimidating empty expanse labeled simply the Gray Waste.
The Gray Waste.
Gray Waste. It sounds like a geographical dead zone.
And tucked away in the extreme bottom right corner, past the mountains and the wastes, is a region centered around Asshai and the Shadowlands. And much like the ruined peninsula of Valyria, the cartographer's visual style radically changes here.
The ink goes incredibly dark. They use these heavy, ominous shading techniques, deep reds and thick, suffocating blacks.
Yes.
It implies intense danger, mystery, and perhaps something deeply unnatural. It is the polar opposite of the bright, clean maps of the Western cities. The map itself is psychologically trying to scare you away from that corner.
But despite that fear, despite the massive Dothraki sea of grass, despite the frozen northern wastes, and despite the shattered red ruins of Valyria, the final map in our collection reveals the most profound truth about the human element in this world.
Yes. Map number 5. It is simply titled Journeys.
It's a revelation.
It is. When you first unroll this map, it almost looks like someone vandalized it. It is the macro map of the known world, but it is covered in a chaotic, tangled web of intersecting red, blue, and yellow lines, tracing paths all across the continents and oceans.
Visually, it resembles a modern flight tracker or a wildly complex subway transit map overlaid on top of a medieval, geographically hostile world.
And it changes the context of everything we've talked about for the last hour. We spent this whole time analyzing how the geography is explicitly designed to keep people apart. The artificial wall, the uncrossable oceans, the endless steppe, the impassable swamps.
But these lines
represent people.
The sheer defiance of those lines is astounding. They cross the turbulent narrow sea. They plunge straight through the heart of the Dothraki grass sea. They skirt dangerously close to the terrifying ruins of Valyria. They even stretch all the way across the map into that dark, bloody corner of the Far East.
It proves that despite the insurmountable geographical odds, individuals, merchants, or perhaps massive armies are actively traversing these distances. The risk must be immense.
Beyond immense.
To cross a wasteland, the financial or cultural reward has to outweigh the very high probability of death. It shows that the lands of ice and fire, while vast and heavily divided, are deeply, actively interconnected.
Geography provides the obstacles, but the Journeys map proved the resilience and ambition of the inhabitants. They are trading spices, they are exploring the unknown, they are migrating across continents.
It's amazing.
These lines represent the flow of information, goods, and culture. Despite the walls and the swamps, it transforms a static, two-dimensional painting of land masses into a living, breathing, kinetic world.
It really is incredible. Think about what we just did today. Without reading a single page of text, without knowing the name of a single king, queen, or hero, we've been able to deduce the reality of a world defined by its extremes.
We really have.
We found a world bounded by freezing oceans, divided by a massive artificial wall built out of pure terror, and protected by impassable swamps. We've seen the physical, jagged scars of shattered peninsulas that hint at apocalyptic cataclysms. And we've explored the dense, claustrophobic sprawl of walled cities versus the elegant mathematical engineering of naval empires.
And ultimately, we've seen that despite the terrifying, vast unknowns stretching out to the east and the north, the people of this world absolutely refuse to stay put. The trade routes and journey lines bind these fractured, hostile continents together through sheer human will.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to think about the geography of your own life. We spent the last hour acting as cartographers, reading the silent stories of a fictional world.
Right. Think about a map of your own city or your own country. If a stranger from another world found that map 1,000 years from now with absolutely no historical text to explain it, what story would the geography tell?
Oh, that's a great question.
What would the shape of your borders, the layout of your concrete highways, and the placement of your walls tell them about what you valued and, crucially, what you feared?
It's like tracing the grooves on an old piece of parchment with your eyes closed, trying to feel the pulse of a civilization that isn't there anymore. What do our maps say about us? Thank you so much for joining us on this geographical exploration. We hope you enjoyed reading the world with us, and we invite you to return for our next deep dive.